Thanks, Charlotte, for that intriguing story about the unsolved murder in Coronado. Up next, this is Michaela taking you on another conspiracy theory journey. Have you ever heard the phrase, "Life is like a box of chocolates, you never know what you're gonna get"? If you know this phrase, you may also know that the phrase is from a scene in Forrest Gump. And if you've seen this movie before, you may even know that this is not the real phrase. The real phrase goes, "Life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get." Here's the clip from the movie.
My mom always said life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get.
If you're surprised by this, you're not the only one. In fact, even in The Office, there's a scene where Pam has to take over for Michael and give his presentation, so she reads off his cards and misquotes the same phrase. Here, listen.
Sales is like a box of chocolates. You never know which vendor you're gonna get.
If you're still not convinced that this is the true quote, because you can almost hear Forrest in your head saying the real quote, then you may be a part of the group who believes in the Mandela Effect. The Mandela Effect is a name given for an occurrence where a well-known phrase, image, or moment in society is remembered wrong. And not just remembered wrong by one person, but many people. Enough people that a mistake like this feels just a little too impossible. And the name Mandela comes from, you guessed it, Nelson Mandela, former South African president. The name for this concept arose after a widespread misconception about the timing of Nelson Mandela's death. In 2013, Nelson Mandela died, and people were confused because they thought he had already died. 30 years ago, many people claimed to have remembered him dying in the 80s in prison while fighting white minority rule. Even former U.S. President George Bush declared Mandela to be dead in 2007, when Mandela was in fact alive. Remember, Mandela died in 2013. Listen to this clip from a press conference of this verbal blunder from former President Bush.
I thought an interesting comment was made when somebody said to me, I heard somebody say, where's Mandela? Well, Mandela's dead because Saddam Hussein killed all the Mandelas. He was a brutal tyrant that divided people up and split families, and people recovering from this.
While Bush was famous for making major verbal slip-ups while in office, this particular slip-up has led to thousands of people coming forward with stories of memories from when Nelson Mandela died the first time. One of those people is a paranormal consultant named Fiona Broom. Broom published a website at FionaBroom.com and eventually a book, too, where she wrote about her vivid memories of news coverage of Mandela's death, and even a speech given by his widow. After she coined the term the Mandela Effect, more examples of its occurrence started to be brought into the light. One of those examples is the seemingly well-known phrase, "Luke, I am your father," from Star Wars. In reality, this is not the phrase said in Star Wars at all. Darth Vader actually says, "I am your father," and never actually says Luke at all.
Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father.
He told me enough. He told me you killed him.
No, I am your father.
Another example is the spelling of the popular childhood cartoon, Looney Tunes. Many people remember the spelling while they watch the show to be Toons, Toons, but it's actually Tunes. And lots of people don't believe it because they feel like they can vividly remember logos with the double O and not the UNES ending. If you get a chance, you should definitely look up on Google Images and see the difference. A third example is Jiffy peanut butter. You've heard of this, right? Well, it turns out it's actually Jif peanut butter and has never been called Jiffy. Employees working at Smucker's have made statements about how although people may genuinely remember reading Jiffy, these logos have never been printed by Smucker's. These are just several out of the many examples of Mandela effects out there. You can go online and look up countless lists of pictures and images, misquoted song lyrics, and more that are supposedly evidence of the Mandela effect. Conspiracy theorists drew the conclusion that this is caused by the existence of alternate realities. They believe these examples of widespread collective false memories are simply points where we've shifted from one reality into another, meaning our past memories are from a different reality and aren't always accurate anymore. This may sound outrageous to some, and luckily science offers several explanations to reason with why this could be happening. There's a process called confabulation, and another phrase for this term is honest lying. Confabulation describes the process our brains undergo when there are gaps in our memories. Our brains try to reconcile those gaps and attempt to fill them in by creating false memories. Another explanation is a popular concept in psychology called imagination inflation. In a psychology textbook written by David Meyer, Meyer writes about how imagined events can eventually become perceived as real memories. Since visualization and perception occur in the same area of the brain, they often overlap, causing perceived memories to be stored as visualized memories. This is what causes people to feel like they are telling honest lies. Just yesterday, my dad was asking me to recall how I packed up before moving home from USD during quarantine, because he's been bugging me to remember where I put my spare car keys. Every time he asks me, I try to imagine myself packing, and there are times where I can vividly remember going back to my drawer to get the spare keys out before leaving, but I'm still not positive I actually did that because we haven't found the keys anywhere. Is this imagination inflation, or did I just switch to a different parallel universe? Another explanation for the Mandela Effect is the ability of graphic designers to recreate logos and brands the way they remember them. This also ties into the visualization and perception aspect I was talking about earlier. People design logos spelling GIF alongside logos with a remodeled Jiffy creation, or Looney Tunes spelled with OONS at the end instead of UNES. These logos may look like the real thing when you look at them, but when asked later on to recall the images, we're more likely to remember the image later and not the fact that it was a false memory. If these possible explanations aren't good enough for you, there are also specific arguments Mandela Effect supporters still bring up that have already been debunked. For example, one of the strongest pieces of evidence in favor of the Mandela Effect was the book English Alive, a book published in South Africa on October 1st, 1991. Mandela Effect enthusiasts love to bring up English Alive. This is due to a one-line quote taken from an article ranging from page 52 to 54, which goes, "The chaos that erupted in the ranks of the ANC when Nelson Mandela died on the 23rd of July, 1991, brought the January 29, 1991 Inkatha ANC peace accord to nothing." When we first hear this line, it sounds like actual evidence. It was stated word for word, Nelson Mandela died, and the date, 23rd of July. But here's the important part, 1991. By using our power of keen observation, we're going to delve deeper into the evidence than most of the Mandela Effect supporters ever have. Not only is this book written by high school age students, but the start of the paragraph where this quote was taken from says, "In our minds, let's go exactly 1 year ahead in time." Do you see how obviously clear it is that this is a misunderstanding of text-based evidence, and it's actually just a prospective fictional statement about where the author believes South Africa will be in the future? Readers even failed to realize that the book's publishing date is 1990, a year before 1991 when the author claims Mandela died. How could they have made this claim if the book had been published a year before? As you can see, this strong piece of evidence was easily debunked in a matter of minutes. This is an example of a confirmation bias, since people who want to believe in the Mandela Effect search for evidence to support their beliefs. They felt so passionately about the Mandela Effect that once they found the evidence that they had been searching for that supported their beliefs, they neglected to investigate further and never realized their careless errors. It's in their own nature not to investigate further and be disappointed by the truth. In fact, there's one more piece of evidence that's also been debunked, and I shared it with you today. People argue that the George Bush quote has been misinterpreted all along. A writer at HuffPost published this response to Bush's press conference on the same day of the actual conference 13 years ago. She writes, "In a press conference this morning, President Bush tried to assert that Saddam's brutal rule over Iraq wiped the country clean of potential democratic reformers, individuals who may have possessed leadership skills like former South African President Nelson Mandela. In doing so, Bush inartfully suggested that Saddam killed Mandela." As you can see, this author, who didn't publish their name with this article, clearly has a broader understanding of global current events and realized Bush was just speaking in metaphors. So whether or not this were our former president's intention, and I have no way of asking him, Bush's poorly constructed sentences have greatly contributed to a conspiracy theory. However, with all the scientific and psychological explanations aside, Mandela Effect supporters still remain firmly rooted in their beliefs. Not only are there people like Fiona Broom out there with a website and a book, but also thousands of others, with people making claims and theories behind these collective false memories. While researching other claims Mandela Effect supporters have made, I was led to a Reddit page named r/retcon. After some slight hesitation, I mustered up the courage and visited the Mandela Effect Reddit page. The top right currently has a description that reads, "A public sub for those experiencing the phenomenon of the retcon effect, or real-life retroactive continuity, sometimes known as the Mandela Effect. This sub is meant to be a place to discuss the effect under the presupposition that for whatever reason, it is really happening at the exclusion of the theory of the confabulation." As it turns out, the idea of alternate realities in the world comes from literature, specifically popular series such as Sherlock Holmes and Harry Potter. Spoiler alert to Sherlock Holmes fans out there, but in the original last book in the series by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle titled The Final Problem, published in 1893, Sherlock Holmes dies. However, in 1903, Doyle published The Adventure of the Empty House, where Sherlock Holmes comes back to life and uses retroactive continuity to explain this return of his death while fighting his nemesis in the previous book. In other words, retcon's a way of over-explaining your own creation. J.K. Rowling did this too when she told her readers that Professor Dumbledore was gay and Hermione was African American. She added and changed to her public narratives. She also left several things up in the air for fans, who can then go ahead and rewrite or add to Rowling's content to include alternate universes and so forth. Therefore, retcon in this sense, or real-life retroactive continuity, refers to people who believe in the Mandela Effect happening in real life. They believe in real-life retcons, or real-life alternate realities and universes. What this all comes down to is the art of storytelling. We are storytellers by nature. Conspiracy theories are just stories that we're sharing with others. Why do we tell the stories that we tell? For conspiracy theorists, maybe it comforts them to think about the possibility of alternate realities being out there. The idea of there being another reality where maybe you didn't embarrass yourself during that meeting, or where you can be closer to your family, or fulfill your lifelong dream. It could also be a way of coping with a false memory. Someone who feels strongly that they may remember things happening one way can be frustrated when they can't prove it to others with actual evidence, and may claim to be living in a different reality. The Mandela Effect also sheds light on human cognition during this age of widespread technology use. Advanced information technology has made it possible for humans to alter their memories and create honest lies when presented with images that are similar to old memories. So in the end, with all the evidence on the table, there's a lot in favor of the Mandela Effect and a lot more to counter it. However, does this really make any difference? What's the whole point of even caring about this? Does it matter if the line, "Luke, I am your father," was never actually said in Star Wars? Or that we don't know if it's actually spelled Looney Tunes, U-N-E-S, or O-O-N-E-S? Or that the phrase goes, "Life was like a box of chocolates," instead of "Life is like a box of chocolates." Maybe in an alternate reality, it doesn't even matter. Thank you so much for listening. Now to Tony for the unsolved murder of Jeffrey Epstein. This podcast was made for educational purposes. All of the media is for educational use. Credit is given to David O'Brien for Nightshade, which was used for the background music, to Paramount Pictures for the clip from Forrest Gump, to CNN for the George Bush September 20th, 2007 press release, and to Walt Disney Company for the clip from Star Wars.